the We Knew the Moon podcast, where we love all things empath, spiritual, witchy, unexplained, and spooky. Hosted by me, Randa Safieh, co-founder of the Goddess Temple Twickenham, and joined by lots of special guests. Hi everyone, this is Dee from We Knew the Moon, and I'm joined again this week by my sister Randa. Hi. Hi. So Randa was with us last week. She is an editor, virtual assistant, and social media manager. Her details will be in the show notes. Do you want to give your website?
www.randasafieh.com.
Okay, fantastic. So last week I presented a very fun topic for my sister. And this week, she's going to be presenting the topic of, drumroll,
Stockholm Syndrome.
Yay!
Following on from Jerusalem Syndrome, when you had Hakam on your show.
Yes, in season 3. So we're kind of expanding our repertoire a bit because we're now going from sort of witchy woo-woo topics to just fascinating, kind of spooky, creepy topics, right?
I love syndromes named after cities, and I actually wasn't.
That's a weird kink.
Yeah, well, I'm interested in them because I'm going to talk about this, but Stockholm Syndrome features in a lot of TV shows and films. So I knew about Stockholm Syndrome. Then I found out about Helsinki Syndrome, which people often confuse the two, but they're different. I'll talk about that. And then not so long ago, actually recently, I edited an article on Havana Syndrome for one of my clients, Middle East Monitor. And I never came across Havana Syndrome before. You can read the article at Middle East Monitor website.
I'll put the link in the show notes as well.
Yeah, it's called Havana Syndrome or Washington Syndrome. And I was really fascinated by it because these sort of syndromes named after cities seem to be kind of really vague, obscure, not tangible. People are still wondering, what the hell are they? Are they even a thing? Is it something else?
It was like in the Jerusalem Syndrome one, the Paris Syndrome, where Japanese tourists are underwhelmed by Paris so much so that they can throw up.
Yeah. I mean, are we just giving things names? You know, I actually am a fan of labels, but are we just giving things names just because we don't know how to talk about it, you know? But anyway,
we don't understand it properly yet. But yeah, I think most people will have heard of Stockholm Syndrome. Yeah. Even if they don't fully understand it. Yeah. But I'm really looking forward to learning more about it because it is one that fascinates me as well.
Okay, let me go. So we've all probably heard the term being thrown around, but what does it mean? That's the thing. What does it actually mean? Because it is just kind of used in everyday language. But I'm going to tell you the backstory. I'm going to tell you how it started, how the term was coined, and we're going to go into all that. So the definition of Stockholm Syndrome is a psychological response to being held captive. So people with the syndrome form a psychological connection with their captors and begin sympathizing with them. The term has now evolved to also include other types of trauma where there's a bond between the abuser and the person being abused. But I'm not going to talk about that because that is a whole big wider topic. That's a whole other topic. I'm going to focus just on Stockholm Syndrome.
In terms of like hostage situations.
Yes, because that in itself is enough to fill a whole season. So I'm going to talk just about Stockholm today. Medical professionals consider Stockholm Syndrome a coping mechanism for a captive or abusive situation where people develop positive feelings towards their captors over time. So the victims live in enforced dependence and interpret rare or small acts of kindness in the middle of this horrible condition as being good treatment. So this is part of the weirdness about it. They start to consider any little kind act that their captor does for them. They interpret that as sort of being really well treated. And that's where the roles change.
Weird, because it's like you would have thought, oh, they've made me a cup of tea. That's nice. But also they're holding me hostage.
It gets weirder.
That outweighs the cup of tea, the toilet break.
This story gets weirder and weirder and weirder. The more I looked into it, the more I was just like, what the fuck? What the actual fuck? I've got little anecdotes of little, things that happened throughout this hostage situation and the way that the captors responded to it. And every time you just think, I just wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. But then you may
never know.
Exactly. So anyway, let me tell you.
And you can see how someone might want to think the best of this horrible situation, right?
Well,
like try to cling on to any hope.
That's it. Exactly that. So they often become the captors. The captives become hypervigilant to needs and demands of their captors, and they make psychological links between the captor's happiness and their own. So it's marked not only by a positive bond between the captive and the captor, but also by, this is where it gets weird too, a negative attitude of the captive towards authorities who threaten the captor and captive relationship. And I'm going to get into that as well. This is just my intro. Just wait till I get onto the story. And so before I continue, here are my sources, because I remember Hakam quoted his sources, and I thought that's a good idea for legitimacy. So I consulted the Britannica Encyclopedia, the BBC website, the New Yorker newspaper, The Guardian, my favorite, and the History Channel website. Those are my sources. So do not let it be said that I don't cite my sources. How did Stockholm Syndrome get its name? So psychiatrist Dr. Frank Åkerberg was intrigued by the phenomenon and went on to define the syndrome for the FBI and Scotland Yard in the 70s. So it was in the 70s that this incident happened, the birth of Stockholm Syndrome. So at that time, Dr. Åkerberg was helping the US National Task Force on Terrorism and Disorder devise strategies for hostage situations. His criteria included the following. First, people would experience something terrifying that just comes at them out of the blue. They are certain they're going to die. So this is their headspace. Then they experience a type of infantilization where, like a child, they are unable to eat, speak, or go to the toilet without permission. And then small acts of kindness, such as being given food, prompts a primitive gratitude for the gift of life, as he put it. A primitive gratitude for the gift of life. And that's a really important theme in understanding, or trying to understand, the relationship between the captive and the captor. He does say that cases of Stockholm Syndrome are rare, though. So what causes Stockholm Syndrome? Researchers don't know why some captives develop Stockholm Syndrome and others don't. That's still a mystery. But one theory is that this is a learned technique passed down from our ancestors. So in early civilization, there was always a risk of being captured or killed by another social group. So bonding with captors increased the chance of survival. And some evolutionary psychologists believe this ancestral technique is a natural human trait.
I mean, I can totally see that you would try to humanize yourself. Like that scene in Silence of the Lambs, where she's trying to like tell him her name and everything so that he doesn't see her as a piece of meat, right?
Exactly. And I was thinking to myself, what are the things I would do to try to be released? I think I would go through everything from bribery to sweet talking to threatening to
womanly wiles. I mean, if you thought your life depended on it.
I don't know. I'm going to reserve judgment, but I don't know. Maybe.
As a last resort.
Yeah. Then I thought I would just make myself so fucking annoying that they just want to get rid of me.
You'd be good at that. You'd be really good at that.
I think that would be my best chance of getting out, is being.
But what if they found you so annoying they killed you, though?
Oh, well, that's a positive. It's a gamble. It is a gamble. It's a gamble. You'd have to weigh up the sort of cost benefit ratio in all of your choices in that situation. But I think, I might even sing to them, Isn't
Holy fuck. That would be the way. That would be the way to end the situation.
Isn't that what they do in Guantanamo? I shouldn't laugh.
Isn't that Havana? Isn't that part of Havana syndrome? It's like weird sounds.
Yeah. It is. But you remember that song back in the day in the 90s? I know a song that will get on your nerves.
Yeah, no, but didn't they do that there was a hostage situation and they sieged, it was an embassy in Latin America or something, and they like forced the hostage takers out by playing Mariah Carey over and over again, or Celine Dion or something.
I know that they use Mariah Carey as a form of torture in prison, but I didn't know that about it's those high notes. They're like sandpaper on your eardrum sometimes.
It's like now in hindsight, now that we don't have to listen to Mariah Carey all the time, a song comes on and you're like, woohoo. But like, imagine listening to one of her songs on repeat.
And that was the 90s, Dee.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that's why we're all so damaged now. We've got PTSD from the 90s.
Mariah Carey was everywhere. Another theory is that a captive or abuse situation is highly emotionally charged. So people adjust their feelings and start having compassion for their abuser when they're shown some kindness over time. So also, by working with and not fighting against the abuser, victims may secure their safety. So when not harmed by their abuser, a victim may feel grateful and even view their abuser as humane. So I think it's kind of almost trickery of the mind where you're trying to cope with the situation as best you can. I don't know. So
can I ask a question, and maybe you'll cover it later, in which case just say, does the cause have any play on this? Like, imagine if you were kidnapped for some political awareness campaign. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just imagining
I don't know the answer, but that's definitely linked to the Patty Hearst.
Yeah. You know, where you're like, okay, well, I don't really like that you kidnapped me, but I kind of agree with what you're fighting for. Yeah, that must fuck with your head too.
I'm not covering the Patty Hearst case, but for those interested in looking into it, there was a case with a girl called Patty Hearst, and actually she was captured by a political group, and they ended up converting, brainwashing. I don't know, because I didn't look into it, but she ended up having sympathizing with them and becoming one of them because she ended up buying into their cause. So look into Patty Hearst. I'm not covering it today because it's just too wide a topic. But yeah, that's a good point, because that is, I think, what happened to her. She was also 19. 19-year-olds are impressionable. I don't know which one was more influential. How is Stockholm Syndrome treated? So as Stockholm Syndrome isn't recognized as a psychological condition, there is no standard treatment. However, like treatment for PTSD, treatment of Stockholm Syndrome usually involves psychiatric and psychological counseling and or medication. So the condition gets its name from a 1973 botched bank robbery that happened in Stockholm, which is the capital of Sweden. So on the morning of August 23rd, 1973, an escaped convict entered a busy bank on Stockholm's upscale Norrmalmstorg Square. From underneath his folded jacket that he carried in his arms, a guy called Jan Erik Olsen pulled out a loaded machine gun, fired at the ceiling, disguising his voice to sound American, and cried out. Yeah, I know.
Someone's watched too many movies.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. He thinks he's in a movie. So disguising his voice to sound American. I know, it's something out of Die Hard. He cries out, the party's just begun.
Oh, God. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfuckers.
Exactly. That's what I thought. I could just, I mean, this is 1973. I don't think Die Hard came out then, but
maybe he was doing like John Wayne impression or something.
Maybe, but there's another funny little bit of the story, which I'll get to. So after wounding a policeman who responded to a silent alarm, the robber took 4 bank employees hostage. So Jan Erik, he was a safecracker who failed to return to prison after a furlough from his 3-year sentence for grand larceny.
Furloughs always make me laugh. It's like, why don't you just have a little holiday from prison?
I know. Yeah, just come back when you're ready.
Yeah, take your time. Oh, what a surprise. He didn't come back.
So he demanded more than 700,000 in Swedish and foreign currency, and he demanded a getaway car and the release of his friend from prison, a guy called Clark Olofsson, who was serving time for armed robbery and acting as an accessory in a 1966 murder of a police officer. So,
I mean, that's kind of cute, but also he's probably got plans to rob more banks with his mate, huh?
You know what else he demanded, Jan Erik, in his demands that he was making? He demanded a Ford Mustang with a tank full of gas. And you're making laugh. I just thought, this guy, he's living out like Smokey and the Bandit fantasy. Every one of these films always has a Mustang in it. So anyway, within hours, the police delivered his friend, Clark, the ransom, and a blue Ford Mustang with a tank full of gas. So the authorities refused the robbers' demands to leave with the hostages, though. So this is where it starts to get even weirder. So there was a 6-day standoff with police, and many of the captive bank employees became sympathetic towards the bank robbers, their captors. After they were set free, some of the bank employees refused to testify against the robbers in court and even raised money for their defense. Can you believe that? Not only did they forgive them, but they supported them. Weird.
Mm-hmm.
So during the standoff between the captors and the police, a bond developed between between the captives and the captors. So one hostage, her name was Kristen. She's quite a key figure in all this. During a telephone call with the Swedish Prime Minister at the time, Olof Palme, she stated that she fully trusted her captors, but feared that she would die in a police assault on the building. So she actually began to really distrust the authorities. Didn't trust them, but fully trusted the captors with her life. So
I'm no judgment for being a bit worried about being shot in a crossfire situation. I think this was a time where that was happening a lot. But yeah, to be like, I don't trust the police.
So Kristen pleaded with the Prime Minister to let the robbers take her with them in the escape car. She wanted to ride in the Ford Mustang.
I mean,
and she actually said, I fully trust Clark and the robber. She meant Jan Erik. I'm not desperate. They haven't done a thing to us. On the contrary, they have been very nice. But you know, Olof, what I'm scared of is that the police will attack and cause us to die. Her trust was entirely with the captors and not with the authorities who were trying to save her. Researching this, I really struggled with myself and my judgment because I just kept thinking, I'd be so angry if someone stole 6 days of my life. You know, I don't even like being held hostage on a phone call or even being put on hold, you know? So, you know, unless they stole me and took me to like a 5-star resort, I'm going to have a little bit of resentment.
Like the hostage situation would have to be better than your actual life for you not to be so annoyed. They must just be incredibly charming. You know how some, and I'm not saying these guys are psychopaths because obviously I'm not qualified to, you know, categorize them, but you know how they say a lot of psychopaths are super charming?
Yeah. I'm not even sure I'd put them in a psychopath bracket, but they are definitely greedy opportunists, and I'll tell you more.
Well, opportunists for sure can be charming because that's very helpful in your opportunistic lifestyles.
So, I mean, maybe that was part of their plan. Maybe the bank robbers, part of their plan is to sort of disarm the people that they're holding hostage. Maybe that's part of their plan to make the whole operation go as they wanted it. Maybe it is part of the plan. I don't know. The unfolding drama captured headlines around the world. So the public flooded police headquarters with suggestions for ending the standoff that ranged from a concert of religious tunes by a Salvation Army band, torture, to sending in a swarm of angry bees to sting the perpetrators into submission.
Oh my God. Do you know what my suggestion would be? Children singing.
Yeah. I mean, unless they're your own.
Oh no, even if they're your own, come on, let's be honest. But at least if they're your own, you have a purpose for the torture. But
to hold up inside a cramped bank vault, the captives quickly forged a strange bond with their abductors. So Jan Erik draped a wool jacket over the shoulders of hostage Kristen when she began to shiver, soothed her when she had a bad dream, and gave her a bullet from his gun as a keepsake, a memento. Here, remember your hostage.
I'd be like, that's going straight on eBay. Thanks. Pay off my mortgage.
Can you imagine? Here's a bullet.
So weird.
Remember the time that you were held hostage, you know? Like
think fondly of this moment.
Yeah, like a souvenir on holiday. It's the whole story is peppered with weird shit like that, you know? It's weird.
Just the mind boggles.
It gets weirder. So the gunman even consoled another captive, Birgitta, when she couldn't reach her family by phone and told her, try again, don't give up. So the captors, like, they were actually showing warmth, you know? So I don't know, you know, they were, they were, but it does get weirder. Not all the time. So when hostage Elizabeth complained of claustrophobia, Jan Erik allowed her to walk outside the vault attached to a 30-foot rope. And Elizabeth told the New Yorker a year later that although she was leashed, she said, I remember thinking he was very kind to allow me to leave the vault, you know? So every little gesture of kindness.
So they're 6 days in a vault as well.
Yeah. So Jan Erik's seemingly kind acts gathered the sympathy of his hostages. So one hostage, Sven, said when he treated us well, we could think of him as an emergency god. I know.
What the fuck does that even mean?
I know. I almost thought to myself, did they start a cult in there? Did they like convert them into, I don't even know. I don't even know. And this story with this Sven guy, for him to say that after what I'm about to tell you is
so weird. Confused.
So by the second day, the hostages were on a first name basis with their captors, and they started to fear the police more than the abductors. So when the police commissioner was allowed inside to inspect the hostages' health, he noticed that the captives appeared hostile to him, the police, but relaxed and jovial with the gunmen. So the police chief told the press that he doubted the gunmen would harm the hostages because they had developed a quote unquote rather relaxed relationship. So even when threatened with physical harm, remember Sven? I'm about to tell you about Sven again. The hostages still saw compassion in their abductors. So after Jan Erik threatened to shoot Sven in the leg to shake up the police, a little tactic to shake up the police, the hostage, Sven, told the New Yorker how kind I thought he was for saying it was just my leg he would shoot.
Oh, it's all right then.
Can you imagine? And then Kristen, remember Kristen? She tried to convince Sven to take the bullet by saying, Sven, it's fine. It's just in the leg. Can you imagine? I'm laughing, but it's crazy.
You take the bullet then, Kristen.
Yeah, just let him shoot you a little bit. It's fine. Anyway,
you can still bleed out from the leg.
So ultimately, the convicts did no physical harm to the hostages. And on the night of the 28th, this all started on the 23rd, after more than 130 hours, the police pumped tear gas into the vault and the perpetrators quickly surrendered. Why didn't they think of that, like on the 23rd of August? So anyway, the police called for the hostages to come out first, but the 4 captives, protecting their abductors till the very end, refused. So Kristen shouted,
at this point, you go on holiday for a week, you're still happy to go home, right?
Yeah. But listen, Kristen shouted this. Kristen, no, Jan and Clark, go first. You'll gun them down if we do. So they wanted, the captors wanted the captives, Jan, Erik, and Clark, to go first because they were worried that otherwise they were going to be gunned down. Anyway, so in the doorway of the vault, listen to this. I told you every next thing I'm going to tell you gets weirder than the last. In the doorway of the vault, the convicts and hostages embraced, they kissed, and they shook hands. You know,
pleasure doing business with you.
Exactly. Or that was a nice lunch. See you next time.
Yeah.
So as the police seized the gunmen, 2 female hostages cried out, don't hurt them, they didn't harm us. So while Kristen was wheeled away in a stretcher, she shouted to the handcuffed Clark, this is what she said to him, Clark, I will see you again. I know. I told you.
I bet she wrote to him in prison, huh?
Everything gets weirder than the last. So the hostages' seemingly irrational attachment to their captors perplexed the public and the police, who even investigated whether Kristen had plotted the robbery with Jan. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's plausible.
Was it all the captors? Do you know?
What do you mean, captors?
That all of the captives, that experienced Stockholm Syndrome in this case? Were there any of those people in that bank that were like, hang on a minute, this is fucked up?
No, because there was 4 of them and there's accounts from all 4.
Woo!
Yep. So the day following her release, Elizabeth, one of the captors, asked a psychiatrist, is there something wrong with me? Why don't I hate them? So psychiatrists compared the behavior to the wartime shell shock exhibited by soldiers and explained that the hostages became emotionally indebted to their abductors and not the police for being spared death. So that's what we said at the start. So even after Jan, Erik, and Clark returned to prison, the hostages made jail visits to their former captors. The relationship continued.
At least that Elizabeth is like, no, there's something fucked up in my head. Why am I not? You know what I mean? At least she understood, I've gone a bit cuckoo bananas here.
Yeah. So an appeals court overturned Clark's conviction, but Jan Erik spent years behind bars before being released in 1980. It's not really years. 7, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, once freed, Jan Erik married one of the many women who sent him admiring letters while incarcerated. I've always wondered why do women do that? You know, why? Like, why? Yeah. I was listening to Bailey Sarian's podcast on Richard Ramirez, who's probably one of the most grotesque, gruesome, horrendous, disgusting, violent. And
also physically awful as well. Like, there's literally no redeeming features.
Yeah. And women are writing. Anyway.
I know. He married one of them.
I don't even want to get into it because I just don't understand it. That's a whole another syndrome. So anyway, Jan Erik, he got out of jail in 1980, moved to Thailand. And in 2009, the little opportunist, he wrote his autobiography entitled, what do you think it's called?
Stockholm Syndrome?
Exactly. So, he moved to Thailand, married a woman that was obsessed with him, writing letters in jail, released a book, Anyway.
I mean, he's got a syndrome basically named after his acts. You can imagine that would inflate the ego.
Yeah. I mean, he did not come out a loser. So it was Kristen, remember Kristen, that according to reports built up the strongest relationship with Jan Erik. There were even reports afterwards that the pair had become engaged. I don't know if it's true, but it's from one of my legit sources. So I don't know.
Weird that relationship didn't work out.
So American journalist Daniel Lang interviewed.
Sorry, can you imagine her being like, "You're not making me cups of tea like you used to in the bank that time."
Oh, God. But you know what else I kept thinking? Kristen worked in a bank, There's some like squeaky clean, men with prospects, marriage material, working in the bank, I'm sure. But she thought, no, I want the convict.
I want that guy.
Yeah.
The one that's holding me hostage. I mean, what must have happened in their relationship to end their relationship that is worse than holding you hostage for 6 days? Like, what did they break up over? Do you know what I mean?
No, I don't even know. I mean, I don't even know if that's true that they got engaged. It was reported, but this whole story is just full of what the fuck moments and I don't know answers.
Yeah.
So American journalist Daniel Lang interviewed everyone involved in the drama a year later for the New Yorker. So the article paints the most extensive picture of how the captors and the captives interacted. So the hostages spoke of being well treated by Jan Erik. And at the time, it appeared that they believed they owed their lives to these two guys. So Sven, who was almost shot in the leg, said he even felt gratitude towards Jan Erik, as we said. And Annika,
I can imagine coming out and being like, "Oh, well, at least they didn't kill us," but not being like, "Thank you for not killing me."
Yeah. So Jan Erik, when he was planning to shoot Sven to show the police that he meant business, Sven said he was grateful that Jan Erik was going to make sure the bullet didn't kill him and would let him get drunk first. So yeah. So
why do they have alcohol in the bank?
That's what I wondered.
Bank executives.
But you know what? You know how the police bring like the hostages food and stuff? So they must have been a demand. I did wonder that. So Jan Erik remarked at the beginning of the siege that he could have, quote unquote, easily killed the hostages, but that had changed over the days. So Jan Erik, he changed over those 6 days too. He became more fond of his, abductees. So Lang, the journalist, wrote, "I learned that the psychiatrist I interviewed had left out something. Victims might identify with aggressors, as the doctors claimed, but things weren't all one way." Olsen one of the captors, spoke harshly. He would say it was the hostages' fault, he said. "They did everything I told them to do. If they hadn't, I might not be here now. Why didn't any of them attack me? They made it hard to kill. They made us go on living, they made us go on living together day after day like goats in that filth. There was nothing to do but get to know each other." So from the captor's point of view, this didn't play out like they wanted. They thought, there was going to be some tussles, some aggression maybe from the people that they
can't imagine you'd plan to hold hostages for 6 days, right?
So them getting to know and like the people that they abducted was not part of their plan. And that actually probably did change the course of what actually happened. So Jan Erik, the main man, where is he now? So since the robbery, Olsen has not been convicted of any other crimes. He lived in Thailand for 15 years with his wife and son, where they ran a supermarket. He's since returned to Sweden, where he has operated a car repair shop and sold old cars, and is now retired and currently prefers to spend his days in privacy. Olsen has shown remorse for his actions. I don't know if I buy that. That might have been part of his PR stunt to sell his book, and has openly apologized for the hostage situation. I don't know if he's sorry about it. It made him famous. He got to release a book because of it. So I don't know how sorry he is.
Yeah.
That sounds to me like media coaching, PR coaching. So anyway, he authored and released his book in 2009.
Is it bad that I really want to read it?
I was just going to say, I want to read it. I mean, I'm sure he didn't write it. I'm sure it was ghostwritten, but still, it's
okay. Story. Well, let's buy a copy between us and we'll share it. Right? I don't want to buy 2 copies off this guy.
I know, because essentially we're giving him money,
I know. It's like, I found out the other day, Dorothea Puente, the little old lady who she had a boarding house for like a halfway house.
I watched that on Netflix.
Documentary. My worst roommate or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, found out that she's released a cookbook
Oh God.
from prison, because you know how she poisoned.
No.
And it's like, part of me is like, I need to see that book, but the other part of me is like, I never want to give that woman money.
No.
And I doubt the local library has a copy of it.
No. I don't want to read her book.
No.
Or cook her recipes. So Clark, the sidekick, his story, just a little bit of backstory, because I actually do find backstories interesting, because there's often a lot in common with their histories, that they didn't have the best upbringing and so on. So his story is that he was born in 1947 in Sweden, and his early years were troubled. His father left when he was 11, and his mother was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. So him and his two siblings were placed in foster care, but they returned to their mother when she had recovered. And Clark had shown an interest in petty crime in his youth that continued throughout his life. So he was eventually acquitted for involvement in the robbery, as he argued he had worked to keep the hostages alive. That was his defense. And you know what? Maybe that is the case. I don't know. They were still alive. He even befriended them. So I don't know. Maybe he was instrumental in that. I don't know. Have to give him the benefit of the doubt. So he was returned to prison to serve the remainder of his original sentence, because remember, he was a bargaining chip.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and Harry's bargaining chip. So he had to go back to jail to finish, his original sentence. And
so they let him out. Right, got you. Sorry, I missed that. They let him out immediately, and then he joined that bank robbery.
Yeah,
right.
That was part of the deal. Yep, along with the Ford Mustang. So he escaped from Norrköping prison, robbed a bank in Copenhagen, and went on the run across Europe. That's what happened. He escaped.
Right.
Yeah. So after a year as a fugitive, he was arrested and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Clark was in and out of prisons in Sweden and Belgium for a series of drug smuggling offenses from the 1990s into 2010. So despite his chaotic life, he was married to the same lady from 1976 to 1999. Oh. So he has 6 children, 2 daughters from before his marriage, 3 sons from his marriage, and a son with his current fiance, and he now lives in Belgium. So that's what happened to Clark. Also, I was thinking about, why am I interested in Stockholm Syndrome? And I think it's because it's kind of it's featured in a lot of films before, hasn't it? It's featured in a lot of films, TV shows. But disturbingly, every time it's kind of glamorized and romanticized.
Yeah, it's because sex sells. So no matter what situation, they have to make a romantic couple, even if it's like a hostage situation.
So I looked into all the films and you're going to be surprised at some of them, because you're going to be like, oh yeah. Okay, so I'm going to list them. These are the films that featured some sort of Stockholm Syndrome, even if they didn't refer to it by name. So The Capture with Ethan Hawke. This is one that does feature romance, but not in the context of Stockholm Syndrome. But remember Homeland with Damian Lewis and Claire Danes? So he actually is captured, I think, by ISIS, and he converts to Islam, then becomes very sort of anti-American government. So that was actually a version of Stockholm Syndrome that wasn't, didn't have romantic storyline. So that was interesting. Okay, then you'll remember this film from the 90s. I think we even saw it in the cinema, A Perfect World with Kevin Costner, where he kidnaps a little boy. Yeah, I remember. And he befriends him. So A Perfect World. And this is the weird one. And I'm ashamed at Disney, probably for a lot of reasons. In fact, a lot.
Pocahontas.
Oh, well, there's that. Oh, God. Where did we even begin with that one? Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, my God.
Yep. Stockholm Syndrome. Then there's Out of Sight with George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez. Again, romanticizing Stockholm Syndrome. Red with Bruce Willis. Transporter with Jason Statham. And The Chase with Charlie Sheen.
Yeah.
Can I say the last sentence? The Chase with Charlie Sheen.
Cheen.
Not what I said it bad. Anyway, so what I found interesting is that it's romanticizing it. And I don't, it's always a little sickening and gives me the ick that like Hollywood romanticizes things that really, they're bad. Let's call it.
Do you think there's little girls out there going, I hope I get kidnapped by a sexy
I hope
guy.
Not. Get rid of that. Don't even talk about that.
Oh.
Okay, so my final thoughts. I had to think about what my final thoughts were, because the whole time researching this, I was just like, what the fuck? What does that mean? Why? And I don't have answers. but the last time I appeared on your podcast, I included my final thoughts. I'm not sure that any of my final thoughts are valid, because I'm still confused by the whole thing. But here's what I'm finding problematic. And it's problematic about myself as well. I'm so confused and even annoyed by the hostages' attitudes toward their captors that I'm verging on victim blaming. And really, no one can know how they would feel in that situation unless they experience it. So, when it comes to the captors, okay, of course, they're assholes.
We're not confused by their behavior.
No, because we kind of expect that sort of thing from convicts, especially convicts of violent crimes and whatever. But I'm confused about the hostages' reaction. So when we talk about Stockholm Syndrome, we are actually traipsing into uncomfortable territory of victim blaming. Like the term daddy issues, which I don't like that term.
Mm-mm.
And, we should actually call it daddy's issues because it's the absent or abusive father who is the issue in that context. I feel the same about Stockholm Syndrome in a way that I can't really explain better than using that as a comparison. That, it's like the term daddy issues. It's actually, almost used as an insult towards a woman who is actually a victim of an absent father or an abusive father. And really, actually, we need to be criticizing the father.
And also just constantly reminding yourself, okay, it's very unlikely that we will ever be in a hostage situation. But any situation where you don't understand how someone's reacting, even though you can tell that they're being abused or neglected in some way, just remembering that you never know how you're going to react in that situation. And that whoever the abuser, neglector, whoever that is, has got some kind of control and is manipulating the situation.
Yeah. The other thing is I feel like if it was called PTSD and it wasn't called Stockholm Syndrome, people may understand it more because people understand PTSD, reaction to a trauma. So it's an interesting story and an even more...
Or like self-preservation technique or something.
Yeah. And also, I meant to say earlier that Helsinki syndrome, people often use Stockholm syndrome and Helsinki syndrome interchangeably, but actually Stockholm syndrome is about sympathizing with a captor. Helsinki syndrome is about sympathizing with an abuser. And that's the distinction. There is actually a Helsinki syndrome. Something happened in Helsinki. Maybe that's another episode. But that I just wanted to make that distinction because people often kind of use Stockholm syndrome as a blanket term for a lot of different things, but actually Helsinki syndrome is different. So I find the whole story interesting and it's a very interesting phenomenon. I don't think it's something anyone can really appreciate unless they're in that situation. But those are my final thoughts, very vague ones, because I think there is an element of victim blaming when we talk about Stockholm syndrome. And
I'm still confused as fuck, but I totally get if you're in such a terrifying situation, convincing yourself and going to some kind of denial that you're not in danger.
It's self-preservation.
Yeah, but I still don't understand.
It actually links back to the cult episode. I think when I was researching this, it reminded me a lot of the cult episode that we did, where convincing yourself of something, delusion, is sometimes self-preservation.
For sure.
A coping mechanism. So that's what that is. So that is my topic of the day. Lighthearted,
Well, no one died.
Yeah, no one died. And, I guess it had a happy ending, I guess,
I guess for some people. Yeah, not for Christine, who lost the love of her life. Well, thanks for that.
That's it for today.
Well, I know you're going to come back later in the series to do a few more episodes. So thank you for joining us. And thank you everyone for listening.
Have me back as a co-host. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.
We Know the Moon is the official podcast for the Goddess Temple Twickenham. Don't forget, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. You can also visit our website, weknowthemoon.co.uk, for all of our upcoming events and merch. If you sign up for any amount on our Patreon, you'll be able to watch our video recordings of our podcast from season 4 onwards, with all the raw bits. That usually means more swearing. Thanks for listening.